Morning arrived without ceremony, pale and thin, sliding between the buildings like it was unsure of its welcome. The city woke in layers, the rumble of buses below, the hiss of espresso machines behind glass, the click of polished shoes striking pavement. Somewhere between those sounds, beneath them all, lived the quieter rhythm of survival. Elias woke before the sun, not because he wanted to, but because the cold insisted. It pressed against his bones, a reminder that sleep was a luxury borrowed in short shifts. The concrete beneath him had memorized his shape. It no longer resisted. He sat up slowly, joints protesting, breath fogging the air. His blanket, once blue, now a faded map of stains and frayed edges, slid from his shoulders. He folded it with care anyway. Some habits were harder to lose than hope. He checked his pockets out of instinct, though he already knew the inventory by heart. A bent spoon, 2 crumpled napkins, a matchbook with only 1 match left, and wrapped carefully in a scrap of newspaper, the last of yesterday's meal, half a bread roll and a small container of soup, long since cooled. He hadn't touched it the night before. Hunger could be negotiated with. Tomorrow could not. Across the city, in a building that scraped the sky, another man woke to the soft chime of a digital clock. The sheets were warm, the room climate-controlled to a precise temperature chosen by someone else. Mayor Thomas Calder lay still for a moment, eyes open, staring at the ceiling where recessed lights waited patiently to be needed. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, messages already stacking up, each demanding a version of him before the day was even properly born. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood, stretching muscles maintained by routine and a personal trainer he rarely had time to see. The bathroom mirror reflected a face the city knew well, calm, composed, reassuring. He practiced that face unconsciously now. It had become a uniform. Elias made his way to the park as the sun finally committed to rising. The park was small, tucked between office buildings and a row of cafes that would soon be busy with the breakfast rush. At this hour, it belonged to the quiet ones, dog walkers, early joggers, and those like him who needed a place to exist without being moved along. He chose the same bench as always, third from the fountain. The wood slats were cracked, the metal arms cold. He sat and watched the city wake up, finding comfort in the predictability of it all. People hurried past, eyes forward, minds already ahead of their bodies. No one looked at him directly, which was both a mercy and a wound. Thomas Calder's morning unfolded in a blur of tailored efficiency. Coffee appeared at his elbow as if summoned by thought. Briefings filled the air with statistics and carefully framed problems. Traffic updates, budget revisions, a protest scheduled for noon. He nodded, asked questions, made notes he might not remember making later. By mid-morning, he insisted on a walk. It wasn't in the schedule, which made it necessary. He told his security detail to give him space to blend in. He wanted to think, and thinking had become difficult within walls. The park was quieter now, though the cafes hummed with life. Thomas walked without destination, coat collar turned up against the chill. He liked moments like this, when he could observe the city without being observed. It reminded him why he had wanted the job in the first place, before the job had wanted so much from him. Elias noticed the man immediately, not because he was important, but because he looked lost in a way that didn't belong to the park. His coat was expensive, his shoes clean, but his eyes carried a distant weight. He moved like someone unused to not being directed. The man slowed near the bench, hesitated, then sat at the far end. He sighed, rubbing his hands together for warmth. For a moment, neither spoke. The city filled the space between them. Elias glanced at the man's hands. No calluses, a faint red mark where a ring usually sat. He looked away quickly. Staring invited trouble. Thomas noticed the newspaper-wrapped parcel on Elias's lap. He hesitated, then spoke, his voice softer than it sounded in council chambers. "Cold morning." Elias nodded. "Colder than it looks." Thomas smiled faintly. "That's the truth." Silence returned, companionable now. Thomas exhaled, feeling something loosen in his chest. The bench was uncomfortable, but the honesty of the moment felt rare. Elias unwrapped the newspaper slowly, revealing the bread and soup. The aroma was faint but comforting. He hesitated, then tore the bread in half. He held one piece out, palm open. "You should eat," Thomas said reflexively. Elias shook his head. "I've had my share." Thomas looked at the offered bread, then at Elias. Confusion flickered across his face. "I'm fine. Really." Elias's expression was calm, almost gentle. "Doesn't matter." The simplicity of it disarmed Thomas. He accepted the bread, fingers brushing Elias's. The contact was brief but grounding. They ate in silence. The soup was shared next, passed back and forth with quiet care. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the moment feel complete. As they finished, Thomas felt a strange heaviness settle in his chest. He had eaten better meals in rooms filled with chandeliers, but none had tasted like this. Elias wiped the container clean with the last scrap of bread, then folded the newspaper neatly. The parcel was empty now. Thomas stared at it. "That was your meal, wasn't it?" Elias shrugged. "Was." "Why?" The word escaped before Thomas could stop it. Elias looked at him, really looked this time. "Because you looked like you needed it." The city moved around them, unaware that something fragile and extraordinary had just occurred. A bench, a meal, two lives intersecting in a way neither had planned. Thomas swallowed hard. For the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to say. The narrator's question lingered unspoken in the air between them, as the empty plate bore witness to a full heart. Hunger did not arrive all at once. It never did. It crept in the way dusk crept into the city, slow and almost polite at first, as if asking permission before it stayed. Elias had learned to recognize its stages over the years. The faint hollow behind the ribs, the tightening that made him breathe a little shallower, the dull ache that followed him like a shadow, never quite touching, never quite leaving. By mid-morning, it was always there. He sat on the park bench with his hands folded loosely in his lap, feeling the weight of the small parcel resting against his thigh. It was light, too light to be called a meal by most standards. But to him it was currency, comfort, insurance. He had stretched worse things across longer days. Hunger could be reasoned with if you spoke its language. Elias watched the rhythm of the city with the detached attentiveness of someone who no longer expected to be part of it. People moved past him in overlapping currents. A woman with earbuds and a coffee cup. A man arguing softly into his phone. A couple laughing about something that clearly did not matter very much. Their lives brushed against his without friction, like boats passing in fog. He wondered briefly what day it was. The question surfaced and sank again without urgency. Days mattered less when they looked the same from the inside. He shifted on the bench, adjusting his coat to block the wind. The coat had once belonged to someone else. Everything he owned had, but it fit well enough. That was another lesson he'd learned. Fit mattered more than origin. The same was true of people. The parcel pressed insistently against his leg. Elias resisted the urge to open it. Eating too early made the afternoon longer. Waiting gave him something to look forward to, however small. He had made a system of these things. Systems were what remained when plans fell apart. He thought about the soup inside. It would be lukewarm at best now, the surface probably carrying a thin skin. The bread would be dry. He imagined the taste anyway, the way memory often tasted better than reality. He imagined tearing the bread slowly, making it last. He imagined the first swallow of soup, the warmth sliding down, easing the ache just enough. He was lost in that imagined moment when he sensed the shift beside him. Elias did not look right away. Experience had taught him that sudden attention could be mistaken for threat. Instead, he listened. The subtle scuff of a shoe against gravel, a controlled exhale, like someone releasing a thought they'd been holding too tightly. The faint rustle of fabric that didn't sound cheap. Someone sat down at the far end of the bench. Elias kept his gaze forward, eyes tracing the bare branches of the trees across the path. He could feel the other man's presence the way one felt a change in weather. Nothing dramatic, just different. He adjusted his posture slightly, making himself smaller without meaning to. Minutes passed. The stranger did not move. Elias stole a glance. The man was well dressed, though not ostentatiously so. His coat was dark, tailored, the kind of garment that held its shape even when the wearer slouched. His hair was neatly kept, though touched with gray at the temples. What struck Elias most, however, was not the clothing, but the man's face. He looked tired in a way Elias recognized. Not the physical exhaustion of cold nights and missed meals, but the deeper kind. The weariness of carrying too much for too long. His brow was furrowed even at rest, his mouth set as if bracing for impact. His eyes moved constantly, scanning the park without really seeing it. Elias felt a flicker of something unexpected. Recognition. The man rubbed his hands together, then let them fall into his lap. No phone, no newspaper, just stillness, heavy and deliberate. Elias told himself it was none of his business. People sat on benches all the time. The park did not belong to him. He returned his gaze to the path, where a jogger passed, breath visible in short bursts. The hunger shifted, sharpened. His stomach reminded him of the parcel. He hesitated. This was usually the moment he waited for. The quiet window when he could eat without being watched, without attracting attention. Yet now, with the stranger so close, the idea felt different. Eating suddenly felt like an act that required permission. He thought about standing up, moving to another bench. He thought about waiting longer. He thought about pretending the parcel did not exist. Instead, he found himself unwrapping the newspaper. The sound was soft but unmistakable. Paper on paper. Elias moved slowly, deliberately, aware of every small motion. The smell of the soup escaped first, faint but real. It curled into the cold air, carrying with it the memory of kitchens and evenings that belonged to another lifetime. He felt the man beside him shift slightly. Elias focused on the bread, splitting it carefully down the middle. The crust resisted just enough to make the act feel ceremonial. He stared at the two uneven halves resting in his hands. This was the point where his system usually took over. One half now, one later. Soup saved for last. But the stranger's presence weighed on him in a way that disrupted the familiar calculations. He looked at the man again. The man was watching the path, not the food. His jaw tightened, then relaxed. He looked as though he might stand up and leave at any moment, as though sitting still required effort. Elias felt a pull he did not immediately understand. He had passed people like this before, people who looked whole on the outside but fractured within, people who carried invisible burdens that bent their posture just enough to be noticed by someone who had learned how to look. Hunger flared, sharp and insistent. Elias closed his eyes for a brief moment. He thought of the long afternoon ahead, the slow march of hours, the ache that would settle deeper once the food was gone. He thought of the shelter line later, the uncertainty of space, the way hope thinned as the day wore on. He thought of all of that, and then he thought of the man beside him. The decision did not arrive with grandeur. It arrived quietly, like acceptance. Elias extended one half of the bread. His hand trembled slightly, though he was not sure if it was from the cold or something else. He held the bread out, palm open, offering it without ceremony, without explanation. The man turned, startled. For a moment, confusion crossed his face. His eyes flicked from the bread to Elias, then back again, as if trying to understand the rules of an unfamiliar game. "Oh," the man said. The word came out softer than expected. "No, Elias kept his hand extended. "You should eat," the man added, his voice tinged with discomfort. "That's yours." Elias met his eyes then, really met them. "It's food," he said simply. The man hesitated. Elias could see the internal debate play out in subtle shifts of expression, the reflex to refuse, the fear of impropriety, the unspoken awareness of the imbalance between them. Accepting charity from someone with so little violated an unexamined rule. Elias waited. At last, the man reached out. His fingers closed around the bread carefully, as though afraid it might break. Their hands brushed, skin against skin. The man's hand was warm. "Thank you," he said quietly. The words landed heavier than Elias expected. They ate in silence at first. Elias focused on the soup, lifting the container and sipping slowly. The warmth spread through him, easing the edge of the hunger, but not erasing it. He resisted the urge to drink too quickly. The man took a tentative bite of the bread. He chewed, then paused. Something softened in his expression. "It's good," he said, almost to himself. Elias nodded. "It does the job." They shared the soup next, passing it back and forth without discussion. The act felt strangely intimate. A quiet choreography developed on the fly. Each took care not to drink too much, though neither said so aloud. Elias became acutely aware of the diminishing weight of the container. With each pass, it grew lighter, emptier. His stomach tightened in anticipation of the absence that would follow. And yet, he did not regret it. The man wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, then stopped, clearly aware of the gesture. He smiled faintly, self-conscious. "I didn't expect this," he said. Elias shrugged. "Neither did I." The truth of that surprised him. They sat together as the last of the soup disappeared. Elias scraped the bottom with the spoon, then folded the newspaper neatly, returning the empty container to its place. The parcel was gone. A familiar ache settled in his stomach, deeper now. He acknowledged it, breathed through it. This was the price. He had known that going in. The man stared at the empty space between them. "That was your only meal today, wasn't it?" he asked. Elias considered lying. He considered deflecting. Instead, he nodded. "Yes." The man's jaw tightened. He looked away, eyes fixed on the fountain ahead. The sound of water filled the silence. "I shouldn't have taken it," he said quietly. Elias shook his head. "You didn't take it. I gave it." The man looked back at him, something raw flickering across his face. Why? The question was not accusatory. It was searching. Elias thought about his answer. He thought about hunger, about habit, about the strange pull he had felt. He thought about how some truths lost their meaning when explained. "You looked tired," he said at last. The man exhaled, a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sigh. "That obvious?" "To someone who's had time to notice," Elias replied. The man nodded slowly. He sat very still, as if afraid movement might undo the moment. They remained on the bench long after the meal was gone. The city continued its indifferent flow around them. People passed, glanced, moved on. No one stopped. No one asked questions. Elias felt the cold creep back in, more insistent now without the food to fight it. He tucked his hands into his sleeves, shoulders hunching slightly. The man noticed. He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket. His hand closed around something, then stilled. He did not pull it out. Instead, he looked at Elias. "I'm glad I sat down," he said. Elias nodded. "Me too." The words surprised him again. For a moment, Elias imagined what it might be like if the man stayed, if they talked, if this became something more than a shared silence. But moments like this were fragile. He had learned not to lean on them. The man stood, smoothing his coat. He looked down at Elias, eyes lingering with an intensity that made Elias shift. "Take care," the man said. "You too," Elias replied. The man walked away, blending back into the city's current. Elias watched him go, feeling the familiar hollow deepen, but alongside it, something else lingered, a warmth that had nothing to do with food. He leaned back against the bench, eyes closing briefly. He did not know who the man was. He did not wonder. What mattered was that, for a short while, the world had felt smaller, closer, as though a bridge had formed where none was supposed to exist. Elias opened his eyes as footsteps approached again somewhere behind him, unaware that this quiet exchange had only just begun to ripple outward, toward consequences he could not yet imagine. The bench felt colder once the man was gone. Elias noticed it immediately, the way absence had weight. The space beside him seemed to press inward, as if the wood remembered the shape of another body and resented the emptiness left behind. He shifted, drawing his coat tighter, and let out a slow breath through his nose. Hunger stirred again, sharper now, less patient. This was the part he knew well. After the giving came the reckoning. After warmth came the reminder. His body did not understand symbolism or meaning. It understood only need. Elias rested his hands on his thighs, palms down, grounding himself. He counted his breaths, an old habit from colder days when panic made hunger feel unbearable. In, out. He told himself it would pass. It always did. Around him, the park carried on, indifferent. A pair of office workers crossed the path, laughing softly. A dog tugged at its leash, nose low to the ground, finding interest where people had passed without thought. Somewhere, a siren rose and fell, urgent and distant. Elias closed his eyes. He had not planned to give the food away. That was the truth of it. He had planned, as he always did, to survive the day in increments. Morning hunger, afternoon endurance, evening uncertainty. His routines were quiet contracts with himself, agreements that if he followed the rules, he could keep going. The stranger had disrupted that, not by asking, by existing. Elias replayed the moment in his mind, not with regret, but with a kind of puzzled attention. The way the man had sat, shoulders tight, breath held too long. The way his eyes had moved as though tracking threats no one else could see. Elias had recognized that posture. He had worn it himself once, long before the streets taught him different lessons. He wondered, idly, where the man had gone. Back to work, probably. Back to a life filled with obligations Elias could barely imagine. Meetings, decisions, warm rooms. The thought did not sting the way it might have years ago. Envy required energy. Elias leaned back against the bench and tipped his face toward the thin winter sun. It offered little warmth, but he accepted it anyway. Acceptance had become another skill. His stomach clenched, reminding him again of what he had given up. "You did it again," he murmured under his breath. He was not angry with himself, just aware. He thought of other times, small, half-forgotten moments, when he had chosen similarly. A cigarette split in half with another man behind the shelter. A pair of dry socks handed off even though rain was coming. Each time the decision had come with the same quiet certainty, followed by the same physical cost. People sometimes called it generosity when they noticed. Elias had never thought of it that way. It felt more like recognition. He pushed himself to his feet slowly, testing his balance. Standing too quickly made the hunger flare. He waited until the dizziness passed, then shouldered his worn backpack. The park bench had served its purpose for the morning. Staying longer would only invite questions, or worse, pity. He began to walk. The route he took was familiar, mapped by years of repetition. Past the fountain, down the narrow street where the bakery tossed its unsold bread in the late afternoon, if you were lucky enough to arrive on time. Past the library, with its wide windows and guarded doors. As he walked, Elias catalogued his options. There was the soup kitchen across town, but the line would already be forming. He could try the church basement, though last time they'd run out before he reached the front. There was always scavenging, discarded food behind restaurants, half-finished cups left on ledges, but winter made that harder. He adjusted his expectations accordingly. Hunger was a familiar companion now, one he knew how to walk beside without letting it lead. He focused on his feet hitting the pavement, on the rhythm of movement. Movement meant progress, even if the destination was unclear. He passed a reflective storefront window and caught a glimpse of himself. The man looking back was thinner than he remembered being, his beard uneven, his eyes set deep in a face weathered by exposure. He studied that reflection without flinching. This, too, was recognition. For a brief, unexpected moment, he wondered how the stranger had seen him. Not as a problem, he hoped. Not as a symbol. Just as a man on a bench. The thought brought a strange comfort. Across the city, Thomas Calder walked more slowly than he had intended. He had left the park with no clear plan. his usual sense of direction dulled by the weight in his chest. The bread sat heavy in his stomach, not unpleasantly, but insistently, as though demanding acknowledgement. He replayed the exchange again and again, each time noticing something new: the steadiness of the man's hand, the lack of hesitation once the decision was made, the way the offer had not been framed as sacrifice or virtue, just food, shared. Thomas stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the signal to change. People clustered around him, unaware of who he was. He felt strangely exposed anyway, as though the encounter had stripped something essential from him. He thought of the reports waiting on his desk: housing initiatives, funding shortfalls, carefully worded statements about progress. He thought of the empty container folded back into newspaper. When the light changed, he did not move right away. A woman beside him cleared her throat, impatient. Thomas stepped forward, the crowd carrying him across the street. He wondered, not for the first time, how many benches like that existed in the city. How many quiet intersections of need and choice went unnoticed every day. He had known the numbers. He had approved the budgets. But he had never felt the weight of a meal like that. Elias reached the library steps by early afternoon. He paused at the edge of the property, knowing the rules. Sit too long, and security would ask him to move. Enter, and he would need to be clean, quiet, invisible. He chose the steps. They were stone and unforgiving, but the building blocked the wind. He sat with his back against the column, knees drawn up, and rested his chin on his arms. His stomach growled openly now, no longer bothering to whisper. "Easy," he muttered. He closed his eyes and let his mind drift, not to memories of food, but to something safer. He pictured the river from his childhood, the way sunlight fractured across the water's surface. He pictured his mother's hands, strong and sure, teaching him how to tie a knot. He did not picture how he had arrived here. That path was well worn and led nowhere useful. Time passed in fragments. A coin clinked near his foot. Elias opened his eyes and looked up. A young man stood awkwardly a few feet away, hands shoved into his pockets. The man said. "Hope that helps." Elias nodded once. "Thank you." The man hurried off, relief evident in his retreat. Elias picked up the coin without looking at it. He could feel its size, its weight. Not enough for food, but enough to matter. He added it to his pocket. Later, when the shadows lengthened, Elias found himself back near the park without quite meaning to. His feet had carried him there on their own, drawn by habit. The bench was empty. He sat again, the wood cold even through his coat. Hunger gnawed at him, relentless now. He acknowledged it, breathed through it. He had survived worse days. What unsettled him was not the hunger. It was the lingering sense that something unfinished hung in the air. He told himself it was nothing. Moments passed all the time without consequence. He had learned not to assign meaning where there was none. And yet, he found himself scanning the park, half expecting the stranger to return. He did not. As evening approached, Elias stood and prepared to move on. The shelter would be opening soon. There would be a line. There was always a line. He took one last look at the bench, then turned away. Somewhere behind him, unseen, a city continued to shift, small decisions compounding into futures no one could fully predict. Elias walked toward the shelter with an empty stomach and a strange, quiet steadiness in his chest. He did not know that the man he had fed was sitting in his office now, staring out a window at the same park, replaying the same moment with equal intensity. He did not know that the meal he had given away would refuse to be forgotten. He only knew that for one brief intersection of lives, he had acted according to something deeper than routine. And though the night ahead would be long, that knowledge stayed with him, a small, stubborn warmth, carrying him forward into consequences still gathering beyond his sight. The day did not announce itself as different. Elias woke with the same stiffness in his back, the same dull ache in his stomach, the same breath of cold air filling his lungs as he sat up beneath the awning where he'd slept. Morning light spilled across the pavement in a pale wash, catching on bits of glass and damp leaves. The city was already in motion, indifferent to the fact that some people met each sunrise from the ground. He gathered his things with practiced efficiency. There were fewer of them now. The empty soup container had been rinsed the night before in a public restroom sink and tucked away, more out of habit than utility. He folded his blanket, shouldered his backpack, and stood slowly, letting his body negotiate with gravity. Hunger greeted him immediately, familiar and unrelenting. He acknowledged it with a small nod, as one might acknowledge a persistent acquaintance. It would be a long morning. As he walked, Elias replayed fragments of the previous day without intending to. The bench, the stranger's hands, the quiet exchange that had unsettled his routine in ways he still couldn't name. He told himself the memory would fade. Most moments did. Yet this one lingered, not because of what he had given, but because of what had been shared. A pause in the city's endless forward motion, a recognition that cut through layers of assumption. He shook his head, annoyed with himself. Sentimentality was a luxury. By late morning, Elias found himself back near the park again, drawn by instinct more than plan. The park was busier now. Office workers clustered on benches, eating lunches pulled from brown bags or plastic containers. Children from a nearby daycare toddled past in bright coats, shepherded by weary adults. The bench was occupied, not by the stranger. Elias chose another seat, one closer to the path. He sat, hands folded, watching the life of the park unfold. His stomach tightened as he caught the smell of food, sandwiches, coffee, something fried. He breathed through it. A group of tourists paused nearby, one of them pointing up at a tall mamassing visible beyond the trees. Elias caught fragments of their conversation. "Historic," one voice said. "That's where the mayor works, right?" Another voice laughed. "Imagine having an office like that." The words slid past Elias without catching. The mayor was an abstract concept to him, a face occasionally glimpsed on posters or screens, a name attached to policies that rarely reached the ground where he lived. He looked away. Across the city, Thomas Calder stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his tie. He had slept poorly. The bench had followed him into his dreams, reappearing in unexpected places. The council chamber, the back seat of his car, the quiet corner of his childhood home. Each time the same offering appeared in the man's outstretched hand. Food. Simple. Unassuming. He tightened the knot and stared at his reflection. The face staring back looked older than it had a week ago. Not dramatically so, just enough to notice. His assistant knocked lightly at the door. "They're ready when you are." Thomas nodded, smoothing his jacket. "Give me a minute." When he was alone again, he closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. He had spent the night reading reports he'd skimmed dozens of times before, Housing shortages, shelter capacities, cost projections. The numbers blurred together, abstract and clean. They did not smell like soup. They did not tremble slightly as they were handed over. He left his office with a sense of purpose that felt both renewed and fragile. Back in the park, Elias watched as a man in a dark coat approached the fountain, trailed by two others who moved with practiced distance. The man's posture was familiar. Too familiar. Elias frowned slightly, trying to place the feeling. The man paused near the fountain, turning as one of his companions leaned in to speak quietly. A passerby slowed, then stopped, recognition dawning on their face. "Mayor Calder," the passerby said, a note of surprise in their voice. Elias froze. The name landed with unexpected force, like a stone dropped into still water. He looked again. The coat, the posture, the tired eyes. No. The realization crept in slowly, resisted at every step. Elias's mind offered alternatives, rationalizations. Many men looked alike. Many carried themselves with quiet authority. But as the man turned, responding to the passerby with a practiced smile, Elias felt something shift deep in his chest. It was him. The bench. The bread. The soup. Elias's breath caught. He gripped the edge of the bench, knuckles whitening. The world around him seemed to recede, sounds dulling, colors flattening. Across the park, Thomas Calder's gaze lifted and found Elias. The recognition struck him like a physical blow. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. He saw the man clearly now, not as a silhouette on a bench, but as a presence that had reached him without knowing who he was. The giver, the one who had seen him. Thomas's chest tightened. He took an involuntary step forward before stopping himself. His security detail noticed the movement, alert. "Sir," one of them murmured. Thomas shook his head slightly, eyes never leaving Elias. Elias stood. The movement was slow, unsteady. He felt suddenly exposed, as though the park had turned its attention fully toward him. He was aware of his clothes, his unshaven face, the thinness of his frame. He was aware of the distance between them, and the bridge that had already been crossed. Thomas broke away from his detail. "Wait here," he said quietly, and before anyone could object, he walked toward Elias. Each step felt deliberate, weighted. People watched now, curiosity rippling outward. Whispers followed. Elias did not move. He could not. When Thomas stopped in front of him, neither spoke. Up close, the differences were undeniable. The cut of the suit, the polish, the quiet authority that clung to Thomas like a second skin. And yet, Elias saw the same eyes, the same tiredness. Thomas swallowed. "It was you," he said softly. Elias nodded once. His voice felt distant as though it belonged to someone else. "Looks like it." A silence stretched between them, thick and charged. "I didn't know," Thomas said. Elias let out a short, humorless breath. "I figured." A laugh threatened to break through Thomas's composure, but it never fully arrived. "You gave me your meal." Elias shrugged. "You were hungry." Something in Thomas's face shifted. The simplicity of the statement left no room for defenses. "I owe you an apology," Thomas said. Elias frowned slightly. "For what?" "For taking it," Thomas replied. "For walking away." Elias studied him for a moment. He saw not the mayor now, but the man on the bench. the one who had accepted without pride, who had said thank you like it mattered. "You didn't take it," Elias said. "I offered." The words echoed between them, a quiet absolution. Around them, the park seemed to hold its breath. Thomas nodded slowly. "May I sit?" Elias hesitated, then gestured to the bench. They sat. The same bench. From a distance, it might have looked unremarkable, a politician speaking with a homeless man. But to those watching closely, there was something different in the way they faced each other. No performance, no hierarchy. Thomas rested his hands on his knees. "I haven't stopped thinking about that moment," he said. Elias said nothing. "I've signed papers," Thomas continued, "approved initiatives, spoken about compassion, but that—" He faltered, then shook his head. "That was real." Elias's stomach growled audibly. Thomas noticed. His gaze flicked downward, guilt flashing across his features. He stopped himself, inhaled. "I can't undo yesterday." Elias met his eyes. "I don't want you to." The honesty of it startled them both. "What do you want?" Thomas asked. Elias considered the question carefully. He thought of food, of shelter, of warmth. He thought of how small the world felt sometimes. "I want you to remember," he said. "Not me, the bench." Thomas nodded, throat tight. A voice interrupted them. "Mayor Calder?" Thomas turned slightly, acknowledging his aid without standing. "In a moment." He looked back at Elias. "May I come back?" Elias shrugged. "Benches don't go anywhere." Thomas stood, straightening his jacket. "I'm glad I sat down," he said. "So am I," Elias replied. As Thomas walked away, surrounded once more by the machinery of his position, Elias remained seated. The park resumed its rhythm. People dispersed. The moment dissolved into memory. But something fundamental had shifted. Elias leaned back, closing his eyes. The hunger was still there. The cold, too. But beneath it all, something else stirred. A quiet sense that the world he thought he understood had just cracked open, revealing paths he had never imagined walking. He did not know where those paths would lead. He only knew that the bench, the meal, and the man were no longer separate things. They were the beginning of a reckoning still unfolding. The park did not empty after the mayor left, but it changed. Elias felt it in the air, a subtle tightening, as though the space itself had taken note of what had just occurred. Conversations resumed. Footsteps crossed the paths. Dogs barked and children laughed. Yet a faint current of curiosity lingered, moving through the benches and trees. People glanced his way more often now, not openly, not rudely. Just enough to register him as something newly uncertain. Elias stayed where he was. He had learned long ago that moving too quickly after moments like that only sharpened their edges. Better to let them settle, to let the world reassert itself. He rested his elbows on his knees and stared at the ground, watching ants navigate cracks in the pavement. They moved with purpose, unbothered by hierarchies or surprises. His stomach growled again, louder this time. He almost laughed. Of all the things that had changed in the last hour, hunger remained loyal. He pressed a hand against his abdomen, breathing slowly until the ache dulled into something manageable. His body did not care that the man he had fed wielded power over budgets and policies. It only cared that food was absent. And yet, his thoughts would not return to routine. They circled the bench, the recognition, the way the mayor's eyes had widened, not with superiority, but with shock. Elias replayed that moment again and again, each time noticing something new. The way Thomas Calder had faltered, the way his voice had softened, stripped of its practiced cadence. "You gave me your meal." The words echoed. Elias exhaled slowly. He did not feel pride. He did not feel fear. He felt exposed. For years, anonymity had been his armor. Being unseen was a kind of safety. Now, a crack had formed in that invisibility, and he did not yet know what might seep through. A woman sitting on the nearby bench leaned toward her companion, whispering, "Was that really him?" "I think so. He was talking to that man for a while." Elias shifted, pulling his coat tighter, gaze fixed on the ground. He did not want to be the subject of speculation. He had never wanted attention. Attention came with expectations, and expectations were heavy. Eventually, he stood. His legs protested, stiff and cold. He waited for the dizziness to pass, then slung his backpack over one shoulder. The park had given all it would for the day. As he walked away, he felt eyes follow him. Not many. Enough. He took a longer route toward the shelter, avoiding the busier streets. The city felt different now, though he knew logically it was the same. Buildings loomed with their usual indifference. Cars honked. A vendor shouted about roasted nuts. Still, the encounter clung to him. He wondered what the mayor would do next. The thought surprised him. He had never before considered the interior life of someone like that. Power had always been something external, impersonal. Now it had a face, a voice that said thank you. He did not know whether that made it more dangerous or more hopeful. Across town, Thomas Calder sat in the back seat of his car, hands clasped loosely in his lap. The city slid past the tinted windows, familiar streets rendered distant by glass and speed. His security detail spoke quietly into radios, coordinating the next stop. Thomas barely heard them. The bench replayed itself again, sharper now that recognition had stripped away ambiguity. Elias's posture, the way he had stood slowly, as if bracing for judgment, the restraint in his voice. "I want you to remember, not me." The bench. Thomas closed his eyes. For years he had spoken about benches in abstract terms, public spaces, community access, urban planning. He had never thought about what it meant to depend on one. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. A question pressed insistently against his thoughts. What now? He was used to clear next steps, meetings, statements, carefully calibrated actions. This felt different. He had not been offered a problem to solve. He had been offered food, and in accepting it, he had crossed a line he could not easily step back over. The car slowed at a red light near the river. Thomas stared out at the water, gray and restless beneath the overcast sky. He remembered suddenly being a child and feeding ducks with his father, how his father had always insisted on breaking the bread evenly. "Fair matters," his father had said. Thomas's throat tightened. Back at the shelter, Elias joined the line without comment. It stretched down the block, a quiet congregation of people bundled against the cold. Some chatted softly. Others stared at the ground, conserving energy. Elias took his place near the end. The smell of soup drifted through the open door, stirring his hunger into sharp relief. He focused on the cracked sidewalk beneath his feet, counting the imperfections. 1, 2, 3. Someone behind him cleared their throat. "You okay?" Elias glanced back. A man about his age stood there, eyes curious, but not unkind. "Fine," Elias said. The man hesitated, then nodded, accepting the boundary. The line inched forward. Elias's thoughts drifted again, unbidden, to the mayor, to the way he had asked to sit, to the fact that he had waited for permission. That detail mattered more than Elias had expected. When Elias finally reached the door, a volunteer handed him a bowl and a piece of bread. He accepted them with a quiet thank you and found an empty seat at a long table. He ate slowly, savoring the warmth. The soup was thin, but it eased the ache. As he ate, he watched the room around him. People bent over their bowls, conversations rising and falling like tidewater. This was his world, tangible, immediate. Somewhere beyond these walls, another world was recalibrating itself. After the meal, Elias stepped back out into the cold, stomach fuller, thoughts heavier. Dusk had begun to settle, drawing long shadows across the street. He wondered if the mayor was eating now too, what his table looked like, who sat across from him. The thought made him uncomfortable. He shook his head, chastising himself. Curiosity was natural, but dwelling on it changed nothing. And yet, the city no longer felt entirely divided into before and after. The lines had blurred. Later that evening, Thomas Calder stood at his office window again, looking down at the city lights. His staff had gone home. The building was quiet, save for the hum of electricity. On his desk lay a folder he had not opened yet. Inside were photographs taken earlier that day by someone in the park. Grainy, distant images circulating already through private channels. A mayor on a bench. A homeless man beside him. Thomas picked up the folder, then set it back down. He had not planned for this story to exist. He wondered what Elias would think if he knew. The thought unsettled him. Power, he realized, was not just the ability to act. It was the responsibility to choose how much of the truth to reveal. He loosened his tie and sank into his chair, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, there would be questions, advisors urging caution, opportunities disguised as obligations, and somewhere in the city, a man would be finding a place to sleep, unaware of how quickly the ground beneath him might shift. Thomas exhaled slowly. The encounter had already escaped the confines of the bench. It was moving now, gathering interpretations, momentum. He did not know where it would lead. Only that the next time he sat on that bench, if he was allowed to, nothing would be the same. Night deepened outside. In a quiet corner of the city, Elias lay back beneath his blanket, eyes open, listening to the sounds of traffic and distant voices. His stomach was no longer empty, but his mind was restless. He stared up at the darkened sky and thought, briefly, of benches and buildings and the strange way lives sometimes brushed together. He did not imagine headlines. He did not imagine consequences. He only felt the echo of that shared silence and the uneasy sense that something had begun to move, something that would not be content to remain unseen. Morning came hesitantly, as though unsure whether it should interrupt what had been set in motion the day before. Elias woke to the sound of voices nearby, low and murmuring. He lay still beneath his blanket, listening. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Someone laughed, sharp and brief. A car door slammed in the distance. The city resumed its rhythms without waiting for permission. He sat up slowly. The shelter had been full the night before, bodies packed close, heat uneven and restless. Sleep had come in fragments, broken by dreams that refused to stay dreams. The bench had appeared again, but this time it had been surrounded by people, all pointing in different directions, all speaking at once. He could never quite hear what they were saying. He rubbed his face, grounding himself in the present. Morning meant movement. Lingering invited questions, and questions led places he preferred not to go. As he stepped outside, the cold met him like an accusation. He pulled his coat tighter and started walking, letting familiarity guide him. The city felt subtly altered, like a room where furniture had been rearranged overnight. He noticed it in small ways. A woman waiting at a bus stop looked at him longer than usual, her expression unreadable. A man passing by slowed, then glanced back over his shoulder. Elias told himself he was imagining it. Hunger and fatigue played tricks on perception. Still, the feeling persisted. By mid-morning, he reached the park. The bench was occupied. Not by the mayor. Two people sat there now, phones held loosely in their hands, eyes scanning the area with interest rather than urgency. Elias slowed his steps, instinctively wary. The fountain gurgled as it always had, water catching the light. Beyond the trees, the outline of City Hall rose, unmistakable once you knew to look for it. He had never paid much attention to that building before. Now, it seemed impossible not to notice. He chose a bench farther away. As he sat, he became aware of a low hum of conversation drifting through the park, like static beneath the ordinary sounds. Saw it online last night. Can't believe it was real. Right there by the fountain. Elias stiffened. A young man walking past slowed, then stopped a few feet away, glancing openly at Elias before turning to his friend. "That's him," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. Elias's stomach dropped. His friend frowned. "Who?" "The guy from the video." "What video?" "The mayor, on the bench, with him." Elias stood abruptly. Blood rushed to his ears, drowning out the rest of the conversation. He felt suddenly too visible, as though the air itself had turned into glass. He did not wait to hear more. He walked away, pace quickening despite the protest of his legs. Video. The word echoed. He ducked down a side street, heart pounding. He had not agreed to be filmed. He had not agreed to be seen like that, frozen in someone else's narrative. He stopped behind a closed storefront and bent forward slightly, hands on his knees, breathing hard. "This isn't happening," he muttered. But it was. Across the city, Thomas Calder stood in front of a large screen, watching the same footage played on a loop. The angle was imperfect, shot from a distance, slightly shaky. Still, it was unmistakable. The bench, the fountain. Two men sitting side by side. One of them was unmistakably the mayor. The other was unmistakably not. Thomas watched himself accept the bread. Watched himself bow his head slightly as he listened. Watched the moment his expression shifted. The practiced mask cracking just enough for something genuine to show through. He felt exposed in a way press conferences had never managed. An aide stood nearby, tablet in hand. "It's spreading quickly," she said. "Social channels first. A few local outlets have already reached out." Thomas nodded, eyes never leaving the screen. "What's the sentiment?" he asked. She hesitated. "Mixed. Some people are calling it inspiring. Others think it's staged. There are questions about exploitation." Thomas closed his eyes briefly. Of course there were. And the man? He asked. Has anyone identified him? Not yet, the aide replied. But people are trying. Thomas's chest tightened. That's a problem, he said quietly. Back on the street, Elias kept moving. He avoided the park entirely now, sticking to narrower roads, keeping his head down. Every phone pointed in his direction felt like a threat. Every whispered word seemed to follow him. He stopped at a public restroom and locked himself inside a stall, sitting on the closed lid and pressing his palms against his eyes. Think. He tried to piece together what he knew. Someone had filmed the interaction. Someone had shared it. Now people were looking. For him. The realization made his chest tighten painfully. He had lived invisibly for years. That invisibility had been both wound and shield. Now it was gone, stripped away by a moment he had never intended for anyone else to witness. Anger flared briefly, at the person who had filmed it, at the strangers dissecting it, even at the mayor himself. Then it faded. Anger required energy he could not spare. What remained was fear. Fear of being turned into a symbol. Fear of being used, misunderstood, reshaped. He left the restroom and stepped back into the cold, making a decision without fully articulating it. He needed to disappear. But disappearing was harder now. By afternoon, the story had grown legs. Thomas sat through meetings that felt unreal. His attention split between advisors and the image of Elias standing too quickly, too exposed. Every suggestion seemed to orbit the same concern: control. We can release a statement, one advisor said. Emphasize humility, community. We should find the man, another added. Offer support. Frame it correctly. Thomas listened, jaw tight. Frame it, he repeated. The words tasted wrong. He didn't agree to be part of this, Thomas said. He deserves agency. A pause followed. That may be difficult now, someone said carefully. Thomas stood. I won't let him be hunted, he said, or turned into a prop. Silence met his words. Later, alone in his office, Thomas picked up his coat. I'm going out, he told his assistant. She blinked. Sir, that may not be advisable. Thomas met her gaze. Neither was taking his food. But here we are. He left before she could respond. Elias did not know the mayor was looking for him. He only knew that by evening, the city felt smaller than it ever had. He found a spot beneath an overpass, tucked away from the main roads, and settled in as best he could. His hands shook as he pulled his blanket around himself. Above him, traffic roared. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the simplicity of the bench, the quiet exchange, the shared silence. He wondered if it had all been a mistake. He wondered what it would cost. As night fell, headlights swept briefly across his hiding place. Elias held his breath until they passed. Somewhere nearby, footsteps echoed. He tensed, heart racing. A voice spoke softly into the dark. Elias. The sound of his name landed with terrifying clarity. He did not respond. Elias, the voice said again. I'm not here to hurt you. Elias opened his eyes. The city seemed to hold its breath once more, as two lives edged toward another intersection, one shaped by power, the other by survival, both uncertain what the next recognition would demand of them. The voice did not rise. That was what made it frightening. Elias. He lay still beneath the overpass, blanket pulled tight around his shoulders, heart hammering so hard it felt like it might give him away. The city's noise pressed down from above, tires on asphalt, a distant horn, the low rumble of engines, but beneath it all was the quiet certainty of that voice, steady and human. "I know this is the last thing you want," the voice continued. "I won't come closer unless you ask me to." Elias's fingers tightened in the fabric of the blanket. He did not answer. A pause followed, long enough to feel deliberate. "I'm alone," the man said. "No cameras, no staff." Elias swallowed. He knew the voice now, had known it the moment it spoke his name. Recognition settled slowly, like ice forming on water, silent, inevitable. The mayor. The absurdity of it nearly made him laugh. Elias shifted, just enough for the movement to be heard. The blanket rustled softly. He sat up, keeping the shadow of the overpass between them. "You shouldn't be here," Elias said. Thomas Calder stepped into the edge of the light, stopping well short of where Elias lay. His coat was unbuttoned, tie loosened, the careful symmetry of his public appearance softened by fatigue. "Neither should you," Thomas replied. Elias scoffed quietly. "This isn't new for me." Thomas nodded once, accepting the rebuke. "I know." They stood there, one in the dim halo of a street lamp, the other half hidden in shadow. The distance between them felt heavier now than it had on the bench, weighted by everything that had followed. "You shouldn't have come looking," Elias said. "I had to," Thomas replied. "They're turning you into something you didn't choose." Elias's jaw tightened. "You mean like a story?" Thomas did not answer right away. His silence was answer enough. "They're already doing it," Elias continued. "I heard them, saw them, phones out, whispers." His voice hardened. "You can't put that back." "I know," Thomas said softly, "but I can slow it. I can stop people from digging where they shouldn't." Elias laughed then, a short, humorless sound. "You think this is about digging? I've lived my whole life being stepped around. Now suddenly everyone wants a closer look." Thomas took a step forward, then stopped himself. "I didn't plan this," he said. "I didn't know who you were." Elias looked up sharply. "Neither did I." The words hung between them. Thomas rubbed a hand over his face. "I came to ask you something." Elias studied him, searching for calculation, for performance. He found none. Just a man who looked like he hadn't slept, standing under a bridge instead of behind a podium. "What?" Elias asked. "Let me help," Thomas said. The simplicity of the request struck harder than any speech could have. Elias shook his head immediately. "No." Thomas did not argue. "Tell me why." "Because help from you isn't help," Elias said. "It's leverage, attention, strings." Thomas flinched, but nodded. "You're right. It can be." Silence fell again, broken only by the sound of traffic above them. Elias's stomach growled, traitorous and loud. Thomas heard it. His gaze dropped, then lifted again quickly, as though ashamed of noticing. "You're hungry," Thomas said. "Always," Elias replied. Thomas reached into his coat pocket, then stopped. His hand lingered there for a moment, before he withdrew it, empty. "I won't make the same mistake," he said quietly. Elias watched him carefully. "You already did." Thomas met his gaze. "I know." Another pause. "What do you want from me?" Elias asked at last. Thomas exhaled slowly. I want to give you control over what happens next. Elias raised an eyebrow. You can't. I can try, Thomas said. I can make it clear, publicly, that you don't owe anyone anything. No interviews, no appearances, no narrative. And they'll listen? Elias asked. Some will, Thomas admitted. Some won't. But it shifts the ground. Elias leaned back against the concrete pillar, exhaustion seeping into his bones. He felt suddenly very tired, not just of hunger or cold, but of choice. I didn't do what I did to be seen, he said quietly. I know, Thomas replied. I did it because you were there, Elias continued. Because in that moment, you were just a man who looked like he needed food. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. That's what frightens me most, he said. How easily I forget that. The city above them roared on, uncaring. Elias considered standing, leaving, disappearing again into streets that no longer felt safe. He considered staying silent, letting the moment pass unanswered. Instead, he asked, what happens if I say no to everything? Thomas answered without hesitation. Then I say no with you. Elias studied his face, searching again for artifice. That'll cost you. Yes, Thomas said. Why would you do that? Thomas's voice dropped. Because you fed me when you didn't have to, and I walked away. Elias felt something shift inside him, not trust, not forgiveness, but a loosening. People will still talk, Elias said. They always do, Thomas replied. But talk fades. What lasts is what we do when no one's watching. Elias looked out at the strip of night beyond the overpass. Headlights blurred into streaks of white and red. Then do this, Elias said finally. Stop them from finding me. Not forever. Just long enough for this to cool down. Thomas nodded immediately. I can do that. And don't come back here, Elias added. Not like this. Thomas hesitated. Will I see you again? Elias shrugged. Benches don't go anywhere. A small, sad smile crossed Thomas's face. He took a step back, then another. Thank you, he said. Elias did not reply. Thomas turned and walked away, his figure gradually swallowed by darkness and distance. The city reclaimed him quickly, as it always did. Elias remained beneath the overpass, listening to the echo of footsteps fade. The hunger was still there. The cold, too. But something else had settled in its place alongside them, a fragile, uneasy truce between being seen and being erased. He lay back down, pulling the blanket up to his chin, eyes open. Above him, the city carried on, unaware that another quiet agreement had been made in its shadows, one that would soon be tested by forces neither man could fully control. Elias stared into the dark, knowing that this moment, too, would not remain contained. The unveiling was no longer about recognition. It was about what came next. The city woke to conversation. It was there in the early morning cafes, whispered between sips of coffee and the rustle of newspapers. It lingered in offices, hovering just beneath agendas and deadlines. It threaded through buses and subway cars, passing from screen to screen, fragment to fragment. By the time the sun cleared the buildings, the story had already begun to harden into versions of itself. A mayor, a bench, a homeless man. Elias did not hear most of it. He spent the morning moving deliberately, keeping to routes that felt quieter, less exposed. He washed his face in a public restroom, combed his fingers through his hair, and stood for a long moment looking at his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back looked the same as always, lined, tired, unremarkable. That steadiness mattered. He pulled his coat on and stepped back outside, letting the city take him in again. Hunger hummed beneath everything, but it was muted now, manageable. What occupied his thoughts more was the strange weight of the days behind him, how quickly a moment could ripple outward beyond recognition. He had given food, nothing more. Somewhere across the city, Thomas Calder sat at his kitchen table instead of his office desk. He had sent his staff away for the morning, insisting on a few hours of quiet. The decision had not been easy to defend, but he had defended it anyway. A mug of coffee cooled untouched in front of him. He stared out the window at the street below, watching pedestrians move with practiced indifference. For the first time in years, he felt unanchored from schedule, from script. It was unsettling and clarifying. He thought again of the night beneath the overpass, of Elias's refusal, not angry or dramatic, but grounded, of the way he had spoken about being seen, not as a gift, but as a risk. Thomas understood risk. He lived inside it. But he had never considered what it meant to have no choice about exposure. He picked up his phone and scrolled through messages he had deliberately ignored. Advisors, donors, journalists. Each message pulled at him, demanding a version of the truth that could be packaged, explained, controlled. He set the phone down. Control, he was learning, was not the same as responsibility. By midday, Thomas left his apartment without an escort. He walked instead of taking the car, choosing routes that passed through neighborhoods he usually only saw through tinted glass. He noticed things he had trained himself not to notice before. The way storefronts changed from block to block, the subtle shifts in who lingered and who hurried. At a corner near the park, he stopped. The bench was empty. He stood there longer than necessary, hands in his pockets, feeling the weight of eyes he could not see. A woman passed by, slowing slightly as she recognized him. Their eyes met. She smiled uncertainly. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," Thomas replied. She hesitated. "I saw the video." Thomas nodded. "So did a lot of people." "It was unexpected," she said, choosing her words carefully. "So was the hunger," Thomas replied. She studied him for a moment, then nodded once and moved on. Thomas sat on the bench. The wood was cold, the grain rough beneath his palms. He closed his eyes and let himself remember the way Elias had held out the bread, not as an offering meant to humble, but as a fact. Food existed. Hunger existed. Choice existed. He opened his eyes with a resolve that felt quieter than determination, but stronger. Later that afternoon, Elias found himself near the river. The water moved steadily, unconcerned with narratives or meaning. He leaned against the railing, watching sunlight break and reform across the surface. A man stood nearby, tossing crumbs to birds. "Funny thing," the man said casually, not looking at Elias. "Everyone's got an opinion now." Elias glanced at him. "About what?" The man chuckled. "About everything." They stood in silence for a while. "I saw that video," the man added eventually. Elias felt the familiar tightening, but he did not move away. "People keep saying how kind you were," the man continued, like it was surprising. Elias watched the birds fight over crumbs. Kindness isn't rare, he said. Just inconvenient. The man nodded slowly, as though filing the thought away. Across town, Thomas met with a small group of advisors, not to plan messaging, but to listen. He asked questions and did not interrupt the answers. He took notes he did not plan to circulate. What happens after the attention fades? He asked at one point. One advisor shrugged. Usually, nothing. Thomas wrote that down. Nothing. That word haunted him. In the days that followed, small things began to shift. Not dramatically, not visibly. Funding meetings were delayed, then reframed. Pilot programs that had languished in proposal form were pulled forward, not announced, just quietly resourced. Zoning discussions took unexpected turns. Thomas did not speak Elias's name. He remembered the request. Elias noticed changes too, though he did not connect them at first. A shelter that usually filled by dusk had space later than usual. Outreach workers appeared in places they hadn't before, not with clipboards, but with coffee and conversation. He remained cautious. One afternoon, he found himself back at the park again, sitting on a bench across from the fountain. He did not look toward City Hall. He had learned that proximity did not require attention. A woman sat beside him after a while, setting a paper bag between them. "Extra sandwich," she said, "if you want it." Elias looked at it, then at her. "You sure?" She smiled. "Yes." He took it. "Thank you." They ate in silence. It felt familiar. Across the city, Thomas stood before a mirror again, but this time he did not adjust his tie. He studied his reflection with a kind of humility he had not practiced before. He had not solved anything, but he had stopped pretending the gaps were invisible. That, he suspected, was where change actually began. As evening fell, Elias finished the sandwich and folded the bag neatly. He leaned back, closing his eyes, listening to the city breathe. He did not feel saved. He felt recognized. And somewhere between benches and buildings, between power and hunger, a quieter understanding was taking root. One that refused to fit neatly into stereotypes. One that insisted on dignity without spectacle. It would take time and choices, both of which were now unmistakably in motion. The city did not change all at once. It shifted the way weather does, subtle at first, felt more than seen, a pressure difference in the air that made people pause, look up, sense that something was moving through them, whether they named it or not. In the mayor's office, the days grew longer. Thomas Calder arrived earlier than usual and stayed later, but not with the feverish urgency that had once defined his schedule. There was a different quality to his work now. Less performance, more listening. The story still followed him. He heard it in questions shouted from across barricades, saw it condensed into headlines that tried to make it simple, palatable, heroic. He refused most interviews. When he spoke narrowly, carefully, redirecting attention away from himself. "This wasn't about me," he said more than once. "It was about what we walk past every day." Some accused him of deflection, others of political theater. Thomas accepted both as the cost of moving forward. The first initiative was small enough to escape fanfare. A pilot program expanding emergency shelter hours through the early morning. No press release, no ribbon cutting, just doors staying open longer, lights remaining on, coffee brewed at 4 instead of 6. Then came the second. Funding reallocated from a stalled infrastructure beautification project to mobile health units that could reach people where they already were. Not just downtown, but beneath overpasses, along riverbanks, behind warehouses. Doctors and nurses who volunteered their time at first, then stayed. City council meetings grew tense. "Where's the data?" one member demanded. "It's coming," Thomas replied. "But we don't wait for perfect numbers when people are cold." Outside the chambers, advocates who had spent years knocking on closed doors felt something unfamiliar: momentum. They did not trust it yet. They had been disappointed too many times. Elias felt the changes in quieter ways. A familiar outreach worker greeted him by name one morning and offered socks without asking him to fill out a form. Another day, a van pulled up near the river with hot soup and no expectations attached, no cameras, no questions. He accepted cautiously. Hope, he had learned, could be dangerous if swallowed too fast. One afternoon, he found himself sitting on a bench again, not the original one, but close enough to hear the fountain. A man approached hesitantly, holding a paper cup. "Hey," the man said, I saw that thing online." Elias tensed. "But I won't bother you," the man continued quickly. "Just wanted to say thanks for reminding me." "Of what?" Elias asked. The man shrugged. "That people aren't problems to solve." He set the cup down and walked away. Elias stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. It was still warm. Across the city, something else was happening. Neighborhood groups began organizing on their own. Not grand gestures, not viral stunts. Food drives coordinated with shelters instead of competing with them. Small businesses offering jobs with flexible hours and no assumptions. Faith groups opening basements at night, not just during holidays. People argued less about who deserved help and more about how to provide it. Not everyone welcomed the shift. Editorials warned of dependency. Comment sections boiled with resentment. A protest formed outside City Hall one morning, signs accusing the administration of rewarding failure. Thomas watched from his office window. He felt the familiar pull of defensiveness, then let it pass. Change, he was learning, always revealed fault lines. During a closed-door session, an advisor asked him bluntly, "Is this worth the political capital?" Thomas thought of Elias beneath the overpass, of the bread, broken unevenly, of the way hunger had equalized them, if only for a moment. "Yes," he said, "even if it costs me." The advisor studied him, then nodded slowly. Elias did not know the details of the policies. He did not follow council votes or budget reallocations. He only knew that the city felt marginally less hostile than it had before. That mattered. One evening, as he walked along the river, he noticed a mural being painted on a concrete wall. It depicted hands reaching toward one another, not grasping, not pulling, just open. A woman with paint-streaked arms noticed him watching. "You like it?" she asked. He nodded. "What's it for?" She smiled. "Nothing official. Just a reminder." He watched as she filled in a section of color, careful and deliberate. The city, he realized, was doing the same thing. Not fixing itself overnight. Not erasing pain or poverty, but reaching. Weeks passed. The video faded from trending lists. New scandals replaced it. The city's attention moved on, as it always did. But the systems that had been nudged into motion continued to turn. Shelter intakes improved. Outreach networks grew more coordinated. Conversations that had once stalled now resumed with urgency. Thomas stood before council again, this time presenting data. The numbers were imperfect. They always would be. But they told a story of reduced emergency room visits, increased housing placements, fewer nights spent outside during the coldest hours. Compassion, Thomas said, voice steady, is not charity alone. It is infrastructure. Some applauded. Others did not. Elias listened to the city at night, stretched beneath his blanket, and felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not certainty. Possibility. He did not know where he would be in a year. He did not know if the changes would last, or if they would be undone by the next administration, the next crisis, the next distraction. But he knew this. One meal had mattered, not because it had gone viral, but because it had revealed what had always been there: capacity, choice, humanity. And now, scattered across benches and boardrooms, shelters and sidewalks, that revelation was moving outward, touching lives in ways too numerous to track. The city was not healed, but it was paying attention. And sometimes, Elias thought, as he closed his eyes and listened to the fountain in the distance, attention was the first brick laid in rebuilding anything worth saving.